Aaron, you mean nothing to me anymore. This is my house, Angela, my sister-in-law, coldly declared. I lay there, bleeding from my head, surrounded by shards of the crystal vase she had shattered. It all began so innocently 5 years ago when Brian and I got married. We loved each other deeply and were so happy to start our new life together. But Angela had a twisted mission from the very beginning, to drive a wedge between us. She's just jealous because you're young and beautiful, Brian would dismiss Angela's constant criticisms and hurtful words. I should have seen them as a warning sign of the chaos to come. At first, it was petty comments about my cooking and housekeeping, but soon she began to imply more overtly that I didn't deserve Brian or his wealth. As I worked hard to keep the peace, her words grew harsher. You're nothing but a gold digger looking for free labor, she would whisper when Brian wasn't around. My brother is too good for you. Even as evidence of her manipulation mounted, Brian was blind to Angela's true nature. He saw her as the perfect sister and couldn't criticize her. Perhaps it was because she had been the beloved daughter, or maybe it was just a result of her brainwashing. He always took her side. I should have noticed the warning signs sooner, but I had been blind to Angela's cunning manipulations. Well, Aaron, this stew is a little dry, Angela had said sweetly during a weekend dinner visit. Casually wounding me, she added, you really need to pay attention when you cook. Brian just laughed and reassured me. Angela's just joking, sweetheart. It's fine. But it was a repeated pattern. She mocked my housekeeping, my appearance, and constantly chipped away at my confidence as Brian's wife. She spent money on anything that would make me look inadequate, and Brian absorbed his sister's toxic words. Slowly, the affectionate way he once looked at me turned into a gaze of doubt and contempt. Isn't that dress a little too revealing? He began saying before we went out. My sister's right. You should dress a little more modestly. The emotional pain grew stronger with each passing year. Angela would storm in like a tornado, leaving chaos and misery every time she visited. Brian gradually took her side and rebuked me whenever I pointed out her cruelty. She's my sister, Aaron, he roared, his imposing frame towering over me. You need to learn to accept her. Meanwhile, Angela would blink innocently and play the victim every time I stood up to her. I'm only trying to help. You're always so defensive for no reason. It felt like the walls were closing in, trapping me in an inescapable situation. The man who once adored me had become Angela's accomplice, allowing her to treat me like trash in my own home. I needed proof of her truly malicious nature. That proof came in the form of bank statements showing Angela had secretly been withdrawing money from the inheritance they shared after their parents passed away. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was more than her usual mind games. She was openly deceiving her brother. Look, I begged, desperately showing Brian the statements. Your precious sister has been stealing from you blindly. His face turned crimson with rage, but it wasn't directed at the betrayal I'd uncovered. How dare you think you have the right to snoop through my personal financial records, he shouted furiously. You've got to be kidding me. I screamed, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. She's been taking money from you for years, and you're attacking me? That's when Angela made her most cunning move. Tears streaming down her face, she burst into the room, sobbing as she clung to Brian. Brian, I had no choice, she wept. Mom's cancer treatments, Dad's nursing home expenses. I was drowning in debt from taking care of them. I didn't want to worry you. With that, she flipped the story, positioning herself as a martyr who had sacrificed for the family. Brian pulled away from me in disgust. Look at what you've done, Aaron. After everything my sister has done for us, you put her through this? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Angela simply smiled, savoring yet another twisted victory. At that moment, I realized I was truly alone in this nightmare, and an irrational determination to destroy her at any cost burned within me. After Angela's final manipulative stunt, the tension in the house was thicker than fog. Brian couldn't even look me in the eyes, still furious that I'd exposed his finances and his beloved sister's lies. "How could you do this, Aaron?" he fumed, shoving his plate away from across the dining table. Accusing Angela of stealing from her own family? She sacrificed everything for us. I tried to protest, but he raised a hand to silence me. Enough. I don't want to hear another word against her. She's the only person I can trust. The message was clear. I was now the enemy, challenging Angela's fabricated story about drowning in debt from caring for their parents. Brian completely believed her story. I should have recognized that our marriage was beyond saving, yet a small, irrational part of me continued to hold on to hope. I decided to make one final attempt to expose his sister's wickedness in a way that Brian couldn't ignore. A few days later, Angela came over again for a family dinner. She wore a provocatively low-cut top, clearly intending to provoke me. Before Brian and I exchanged even a few words, she began her usual insults. Well, look at her. She's just desperate to keep up appearances," she sneered as I set the table. "Isn't that shirt a little too tight? Trying to catch someone else's attention besides my brother, dear?" I felt my cheeks flush with humiliation, but this time I refused to take the bait. "Hello, Angela. It's nice to see you," I replied calmly, keeping my composure. She looked momentarily unsettled by my serene tone. "What's this? No sarcastic comeback today? Finally learned a little grace, have you?" "That's enough, Angela." Brian finally showed some courage and reprimanded her. "Leave her alone." A surge of gratitude rose within me. He was actually defending me. But Angela simply shook her head slowly, smirking. "Brian, you're truly blind. Can't you see how disrespectful and ungrateful this little witch is? Always running her mouth. I'm not surprised you can't control her. If it were me, I'd have disciplined that little troublemaker a long time ago." That's when the chaos exploded. "You hypocrite!" I shouted as my wine glass shattered against the floor. "I knew you'd never stop your malicious, toxic behavior." Angela feigned shock and staggered back. "I've never done anything like that." "Brian, did you hear what she just called me?" Brian's voice thundered. "Watch your mouth, Aaron. You're talking to my sister." Years of anger and resentment boiled over as I turned to face him. "Are you kidding me? She's been hurling insults at me since the moment she walked through the door. Why do you keep defending her?" "Because she's my family," he roared, spit flying from his mouth. "Blood is thicker than water. Have you forgotten that?" "Oh, is that so? Let's talk about family, then. Have you conveniently forgotten the bank statements I showed you?" Angela gasped dramatically, placing her delicate hand over her chest. "Brian, I didn't know she was still continuing with those ridiculous accusations. Spreading such lies about me." With an expression like I'd slapped him, Brian's neck veins bulged as he clenched his fists and walked toward me. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might hit me. "Get out," he said in a low, trembling voice. "Get out of my house now, before I do something I'll regret." As Angela smiled behind him, I stared at him in disbelief. It was over. My marriage was over, and she had one. But I still wasn't ready to give up. "You really want me gone that badly?" I shouted recklessly. "Fine, I'll go. But before I do, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of psychopath your sister is." That night, tears of anger and despair burned my eyes as I stormed out of the house. Brian had made his choice clear. No matter how much trouble his toxic sister caused me, she would always come first. Where could I go? I had sacrificed my career, my friends, and my entire life to be Brian's wife, and now, because I stood up to his insane sister, I was left with nothing. There was only one person I could turn to. My best friend, Hannah, let me fall apart the moment she opened the door. Years of suppressed emotions came flooding out. That wicked woman ruined everything, I sobbed as Hannah pulled me inside. Brian's completely brainwashed. He'll never see her for the manipulative monster she really is. Hannah hugged me tightly, letting me cry it all out. Once I regained my composure, she looked at me with a dark resolve in her eyes. Enough is enough, Aaron. You can't let Angela keep stomping all over you like this. It's time to fight back. I shook my head in defeat. You don't know the half of what I've been through. Brian is in the palm of her hand, and he doesn't believe a word I say about her true nature. That's why you need evidence, Hannah said firmly. Proof that she's the scheming psychopath you say she is. With that, you can finally take her down for good. A flicker of hope sparked in my chest. The bank statements proving she'd stolen from the inheritance were just the tip of the iceberg. There had to be more. Hannah nodded solemnly. Let's start first thing tomorrow morning. I'm not going to let this witch destroy my best friend's life. Over the next few days, Hannah and I planned a way to sneak into Brian's house and gather the information needed to take Angela down for good. Since Hannah worked as a real estate agent, making a copy of the house key and timing it for when Brian was at work was easy. Keep an eye out for anything suspicious, she instructed as we stepped inside. Mail, letters, documents. Anything could hold the key to exposing Angela for who she truly was. With trembling hands and a pounding heart, I searched Brian's office. If Angela caught me, the thought of the consequences made me shudder. But then, a hidden file caught my attention. It contained bank statements and legal documents from years ago. Flipping through the pages, I felt the blood drain from my face. Hannah, look at this, I said in a shaking voice. The documents confirmed my worst fear. Angela had been investigated years ago for the attempted murder of her husband. According to witness testimonies, she had withdrawn money from his accounts and pressured him to change his will. Later, the husband mysteriously died in a suspicious car accident, but the police couldn't prove foul play. Angela inherited everything, and the case had gone unsolved. No way, Hannah gasped, covering her mouth. Are you saying this lunatic killed her husband for money? Numb with disbelief, I slowly nodded. And now, she's trying to do the same thing to Brian. That's why she's been trying to drive me away from him. I'm the one standing in the way of her getting his inheritance. Hannah's eyes sharpened with resolve. This is all the evidence we need. It's time to settle her crimes once and for all. A dark determination consumed me, washing away the fear and doubt. Angela's reign of terror was about to collapse, and this time she wouldn't be able to play the victim. I was speechless as I stared at the proof of Angela's murderous past. This went far beyond her usual schemes and manipulations. She was a genuine psychopath who had committed murder for money. We need to take this to the police immediately, Hannah declared. We don't know what this lunatic, who got away with murder once, will do next. Still reeling from the shock of our discovery, I nodded. I'd always suspected Angela was unhinged, but having proof she was a murderer brought the situation to a terrifying new level. You don't understand, I said weakly. Brian won't believe anything we show him. He's too far under her spell. Hannah said firmly. Then we'll take her to court with or without his help. This has gone too far. It's time she faced serious consequences. Over the next few days, we pieced together an airtight case to present to the authorities. Bank statements, witness testimonies, and phone records showed that Angela's husband had been trying to escape her control in the months leading up to his tragic accident. As the full truth came to light, the most chilling detail was the crime scene photos. The destroyed car that had plunged into a ditch, the body in a black bag at the side of the road. The thought that Angela may have orchestrated such a horrific death just to claim her husband's fortune made me nauseous, and I had to look away. "She's going to do the same thing to Brian after I'm gone," I whispered. "She's taken the inheritance from their parents, and now she wants everything. The house, the car, the entire lifestyle you built with him," Hannah added, her gaze burning with determination. "She won't stop until we stop her first. We have all the evidence we need to lock this monster up for life." The next day, we took the files to the police station and requested a meeting with a detective. As we presented the evidence of Angela's escalating abuse and violence toward me, I could barely speak. The gray-haired officer looked through the documents, his eyes widening. "Are you telling me this woman got away with killing her husband for money years ago, and now she's trying to do the same thing to her brother?" he asked incredulously. I nodded sadly. "Brian is completely under her control. No matter what terrible things she does, he sides with her over me. I'm afraid of what she'll do if we don't stop her." "Don't worry, ma'am. This is more than enough evidence to put Angela behind bars. Trying to kill your own family for an inheritance, that's as low as it gets, even in my line of work." He paused, then looked at me with a sharp gaze, as if sizing me up. "Tell me, how did you gather all of this evidence? These are remarkable records." As the weight of everything began to lift, a wave of adrenaline hit me. This was the beginning of the end of Angela's twisted reign. There would be no more games, no more manipulation, and no more fake tears. Only the cold, hard consequences of her unforgivable actions awaited. "I've had plenty of practice seeing through that snake's lies," I answered firmly. "It's time she pays for what she's done to my family." As I left, I thought I saw a look of respect flash across the detective's face. At that moment, I realized I had been underestimated as a mere victim for far too long. Now, the ruthless predator was about to become the prey, and this time, I would show no mercy. But I should have known Angela wouldn't surrender without one final, vicious fight. The day after Hannah and I turned in the damning evidence to the police, the devil herself was waiting for me. When I returned to my friend's apartment, she sneered, well, if it isn't the ungrateful little schemer," as I froze at the door. Angela stood up from the sofa, one hand on her hip, her malicious eyes glinting as they bore into me. "I knew you were plotting something behind my back." My heart pounded, but I refused to show fear. "Get out, Angela. It's over. The police know everything you've done." Instead of fear, she threw her head back and laughed, the cold, cruel sound sending chills through my veins. "Fool," she whispered. "Did you really think you could take me down with a few pathetic documents?" In that terrifying moment, before I could blink, Angela lunged, snatching a heavy crystal vase from the side table and raising it like a weapon. "This is what you get for meddling." And with sickening force, the vase smashed into my head. The pain burst bright and brutal, and darkness completely swallowed me. I crumpled lifelessly to the floor as warm blood pooled from my wound. Angela leaned over me, her face twisted in rage, spitting venom as she growled. "Just die now. Do you hear me? That house, that life, it's all mine now. I'll show Brian what you really are. A lying, spiteful witch." I tried to fight back, tried to speak, but the darkness dragged me under. The last thing I saw was Brian bursting through the door, his face contorted in terror. "Angela, what have you done?" he shouted, his voice the last sound I heard before losing consciousness. I drifted in and out, fragments of voices and movement breaking through a distant fog. I thought I heard an ambulance siren in the background. Eventually, I woke up in a hospital bed. Hannah sat beside me, deep worry etched into her face. My head throbbed with a searing pain, a thick bandage wrapped tightly around my skull. "Oh, Aaron, thank God you're awake." "I thought I'd lost you," Hannah whispered, gripping my hand. The memories came flooding back. Angela's twisted smile, the shattered vase, the burning pain, the blood. "She tried to kill me," I croaked. "Where is she? Was she arrested?" Hannah looked away, her expression troubled. "The police detained her, but—" "Aaron, you won't believe this. Brian refused to press charges. He claimed you two were just arguing over him." Anger surged through me, momentarily dulling the pain. Ignoring the pounding in my head, I ripped the $4 from my arm and tried to sit up. "That coward. He's still defending her?" I growled. Hannah gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "Aaron, you need to rest. Calm down." I wanted to scream, to let the fury explode out of me, but the cruel reality struck me hard. My husband was blindly loyal to Angela's lies, excusing her attack and defending her actions. Our marriage was shattered beyond repair. "You're right," I admitted, sinking back into the pillow. "It's over. Brian's completely lost. He'll never see her for the monster she really is." But as I said the words, a strange sense of calm settled over me. In that moment, I realized my fight was no longer with Brian. It was with Angela, the venomous snake herself. This time, I was determined not to stop until justice had been served and Angela faced the consequences of her actions. Tears and pleas would no longer work to make Brian see reason. It was time to deliver a decisive blow before his deranged sister claimed another innocent life. I turned to Hannah, my gaze hard with determination. "I have to go. I have a plan to make sure Angela never hurts another soul again. Will you help me?" Without hesitation, Hannah nodded firmly. "Of course. It's time that psychopath finally paid for her crimes." An uneasy silence settled over the hospital room as Brian walked in. Uncertainty clouded his face. My body tensed instinctively, and I gripped Hannah's hand for support. "What do you want?" I asked bluntly. I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. "Another excuse for your crazy sister?" Though my tone shook him slightly, Brian didn't bite. Instead, he collapsed heavily into the chair, exhaustion carved into his features. "Aaron, I don't even know where to begin. What Angela did, trying to kill you in cold blood." His voice trailed off as he slowly shook his head. Despite the weight of his words, I felt no vindication. Only a deep, tired resignation and a simmering anger. "Stop," I cut him off coldly. "Your sister is a murderous psychopath. And deep down, you've always known it. You just chose to ignore the ugly truth because she's your flesh and blood." Before Brian could protest, years of repressed anger exploded out of me. "Don't even deny it. I showed you proof that she was stealing from your inheritance, manipulating me, and even documents exposing her as a murderer who killed her husband for money. And still, you refuse to face the truth." In a barely audible voice, Brian admitted, "You're right," his shoulders slumping in defeat. I was so deep in denial about Angela that I let her control my life. I allowed her to abuse you, manipulate me, and betray my own wife. He looked up, his eyes filled with the kind of regret that would haunt him forever. "You didn't deserve any of this. I was just too blind and weak to resist her twisted games." A fiery anger burned in my chest, and I struggled to stay calm. "So, what now? I asked in a trembling voice. Am I supposed to forgive and forget because you finally admit she's a monster? Brian slowly shook his head. No, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Not after allowing this to happen under my own roof. The words hung heavy in the air. It was over between us. It was a blow I had expected, yet it still hit me with the force of a physical attack. Even though I had accepted the end of our marriage, a small, delusional part of me had clung to the hope that Brian would try to make things right after Angela's evil was exposed. I'll file for divorce immediately, he continued, avoiding my gaze. I won't contest anything. The house, the assets, it's all yours. I let Angela's poison make me lose the best thing in my life. This is the least I can do. I couldn't find the words to respond. Part of me yearned to unleash a tirade of angry words upon the empty husk of the man I once cherished, yet a more profound void prevailed. His surrender brought me no peace. Hannah's voice, laced with disdain, cut through the silence, condemning him. That's it? You're just going to slink away and let your crazy sister rot in prison? Typical. I wish there was more I could say or do, Brian shrugged, slumping further. But we both know there's no going back. You deserve a better life, Aaron. With that, he dragged his feet toward the door. Pausing on the threshold, he turned back one last time and said, For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry. For everything. And then he left, abandoning me in the wreckage of our lives. As Hannah wrapped her arms around me, tears streamed down my face. Years of suppressed anger, pain, and anguish burst free like a dam breaking. My marriage was over, and my husband was lost to Angela's toxic influence. But amidst the loss, a strange sense of freedom and determination began to grow. Brian had been too weak to stand up to his twisted sister, but I was not. Angela's reign of terror would end, one way or another. In the days following Brian's departure, I stood at a crossroads. One path led to despair, a descent into the ashes of a failed marriage, ravaged by trauma and betrayal. The other path burned with resolve to set things right. I won't let Angela get away with this, I declared, my voice steady and full of conviction. She tried to kill her own sister-in-law. I can't let such corruption go unchecked. Hannah looked into my eyes and nodded sadly. You're absolutely right. That psychopath has escaped consequences for far too long. It's time she faced the justice she deserves. As the days passed after my discharge, I felt the weight of years of emotional and physical abuse slowly lifting. Angela was gone from my life, and while she wasn't yet behind bars, Hannah and I had done everything we could to gather the evidence against her. Now, it was up to the justice system to bring her down. But I wasn't going to wait any longer. I had a life to rebuild. Brian and I finalized our divorce quietly. Unable to bear the constant reminders of his sister's destruction of our marriage, he moved out of the house soon after. Still, I no longer felt anger toward him. Only pity. He was a broken man, a victim of his sister's manipulation, but that didn't excuse his choices. His loyalty to Angela had cost him his marriage, his home, and his happiness. The house was mine now, but it was a hollow and bitter victory. Unable to bear the humiliation and scars it held, I sold it within weeks. The money from the sale was enough for me to leave the city where my old life had crumbled and start anew. Meanwhile, Angela was finally facing her reckoning. The evidence Hannah and I provided, combined with the police investigation, was enough to build an ironclad case. Testimonies from her late husband's friends and financial records proving embezzlement and attempted fraud led authorities to reopen the investigation into his mysterious death. On the day of Angela's arrest, the detective called me. "It's done, Ms. Smith," he said, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. We've arrested her. She won't be able to hurt anyone else again. Relief washed over me, but it wasn't a sense of victory. It was simply an end to the years of suffering and a release from Angela's web of lies and cruelty. Angela's trial was set for the following year. She faced charges of embezzlement, assault, and fraud, with the investigation into her husband's suspicious death also reopened. At first, she denied everything, but the evidence against her became insurmountable. Her mask of innocence shattered completely when a former associate of her late husband testified that she had pressured him into changing his will shortly before his death. Angela was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The media widely covered the case, branding her the Black Widow, a woman who used her family for financial gain. Angela may have believed she could manipulate her way out of any situation, but this time, there was no escape from justice. As for Brian, I never saw him again after the divorce was finalized. He left town, unable to escape the shame of what had happened. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that he had entered a trauma rehabilitation program. I hold no hatred for him anymore. He was someone I once loved, and though his weakness led to our ruin, I hope that one day, like me, he finds peace. Hannah and I moved forward, stronger than ever before. Together, we left the city and decided to start fresh in a small town. There, I found work that reignited my passion, becoming a consultant for survivors of domestic violence. My experiences gave me insight into the dangerous, often invisible emotional manipulation inflicted by people like Angela. My mission became helping others reclaim their self-worth and control over their lives, just as I had. Step by step, I rebuilt my life, surrounded by people who supported and encouraged me. The house, the money, the things I once clung to as symbols of stability no longer mattered. I now had something far more valuable: freedom, peace, and a strength that no one could ever break again. Angela had been a dark force in my life, but ultimately, she was defeated. Not just by the justice system, but by my refusal to surrender to her cruelty. I won, not through violence or revenge, but through resilience, perseverance, and a refusal to be broken. And I realized that was the most gratifying triumph of all.